Have you ever wondered what's really going on inside of your grill? Well, today we're going to do a bunch of tests and try and unpack a bit more of the mystery of what's actually going on inside of a Kamado style grill so that we can use that information to our advantage to improve our cooks. Let's get into it. So I've devised 3 tests that are going to help us understand a little bit more about what's going on inside these different Kamado branded grills. So the first test I started last year and I learned a ton about convection airflow, and so I was blown away at some of the differences between setups as well as different grills in terms of the amount of volume that the air is being pushed throughout our grill. So I picked up an aeronometer last year to help me get some sense of that. So what we're going to do is we're going to get all of our grills, do a couple tests, but they're going to run for hours to simulate a low and slow cook at 250 degrees Fahrenheit. And towards the end, when I know everything is heat soaked and running as it would in a real cooking environment, we'll get our aeronometer and take different measurements to see if there is any noticeable difference between the amount of air moving and circulating inside of these different cookers. The second test related to airflow is the heat signature. And so I've been borrowing an infrared IR camera gun that's been helping sort of paint a picture literally of the heat signatures inside of our grill. If you haven't heard the term heat signatures, this is another word for where are their hot spots, where's their stored energy. And that can matter. If there's a bunch of stored energy below your brisket, this could lead to tearing and shredding of your brisket from overcooking the bottom. If there is untapped potential and stored energy in the top, getting something higher up into the dome could help render out and give crispy chicken skin, or a whole bunch of other useful examples can come to mind. But understanding the different heat signatures across these grills, particularly when we have double-walled steel, we have cast iron, and we have 2 different ceramic grills, the infrared camera can help paint a picture of how efficient these cookers are in terms of storing and using energy to help cook whatever it is that you've placed inside them. And last but not least is evaporative cooling. And so this is something, if you're doing a brisket, a pork shoulder, or anything like that, trying to measure how much moisture is lost, and that is a combination of the heat energies, whether it's conduction, the food sitting on the grill, convection, the airflow moving around, or any sort of that radiant energy that I mentioned, sort of helping cook whatever it is that we've placed. So thanks to Jeremy from Mad Scientist Barbecue for this idea. He gave me an idea of placing a wet sponge in a foil pan. We'll take a measurement of the weight before and after. We'll get those all as close as possible. And then after a couple hours of simulating a low and slow cook, we will weigh them to see if all the combination of this convection, conduction, and radiant energy translates into accelerated or slower cooking results in terms of validating some of the hands-on experiences that I've had with either of these Kamado brands in the past in a real cooking environment. Thank you to my friends from Fogo for providing the fuel for today's test, as we're going to burn through a bunch. So speaking of that, let's fire up our grills. Okay, I've already got started by adding a little bit of water and a sponge and brought out a food scale. So why this matters is most briskets on average are about 71% water raw and 56% when cooked, which means we lose on a 15-pound brisket a little bit over 2 pounds, upwards of actually about 2.5 pounds. So what I want to do with this is add about 2 pounds just so that it's even. This isn't going to be in as long as a brisket cook would be, but I want to have sort of an equal starting spot for each of our water pans. So I'll take it fast forward while I get these to 2 pounds. Okay, our grills are stable at 250 degrees Fahrenheit. Let's add our pans to each. So I'll be back in a couple hours and we will take our measurements to see how much evaporative cooling and moisture loss each of the grills have provided. At the same time, that's when I'll grab the infrared camera and start to do some tests of our deflector stones, as well as the heat-soaked differences between each of the grills. And then we'll grab our aeronometer and take an airflow measurement as well before we open up each one and start to mess with any of the potential vent settings. So for me, it'll be a couple hours, but for you, it'll be just like that. All right, it's been 4 hours of running at 250 degrees. So what I'm going to do really quick is open everything, take out the pans of water, go back over to our food scale and measure that. Then we can grab our IR camera, our IR gun, as well as the aeronometer and do a couple of our measurements. Meet you over there. Quickly before we do that and we lose some temperature, I'm just gonna take a water temperature using my Chef's Temp X10 So this is the KJ. Hopefully you can see the writing on there, but that was 132. The Weber water, and I'm doing this to get a sense of, again, the deflector plate transferring energy. So 134. The Goldens, 144. So a little bit hotter from the two metal deflector plates so far. And then last but not least, front one, our Primo, 138.9. So the two ceramic were closer, the two metal were hotter. And again, just before things cooled off, this is just helping give us one more extra data point, because we're going to measure the evaporative cooling, but I also wanted to know sort of the energy transferring to the bottom, and I thought the water temperature would give us a quick read. Let's grab the scale. Okay, let's get started with the Weber. Move the other pan out of the way here. So we started at 2, we're down to 1.72 pounds on the Weber, and just move the sponge out of the way. Hopefully you can see the writing coming through, if not on the bottom of our foil pan for each one. So this is the Goldens pan. So we have dropped a little bit more, looks like, so we're down to 1.66 pounds on the Goldens cast iron Kamado. Next I have the, I think it says Kamado Joe on there, KJ. So here's our KJ pan. So we are 1.52. And last but not least, you can see the writing there, our Primo pan. And we are 1.58. Okay, next up I have my aeronometer, and we're not even done the test, and a little bit confused because I saw water temperatures higher on our two metal deflector plates. We were very similar. I'll put them up on screen because I don't remember everything, but our Primo, Kamado Joe, water temperatures were very close, and from memory I think Kamado Joe was a touch cooler. And then on the evaporation side, we evaporated the most on the Kamado Joe, nearly the same amount on the Primo, and the least on the two hotter deflector plates. I'm hoping that the aeronometer gives us a little bit clearer picture in terms of what's going on with the airflow inside of our grills. Let's start with the Weber Summit. Okay, we're riding right along at 250 degrees Fahrenheit. I've got the aeronometer, which I don't think is picking up any readings with the vents partially obstructed. So the game plan, I'll just flip open the damper, which is technically allowing more air, but hopefully doing that really quickly, we won't change the natural result in terms of what the fire is actually generating. Let's open it up, start getting a reading. Well, I'm worried I held that too long. I started to hear a clicking sound. I might have just melted my aeronometer made of plastic, but we'll give it a try and see if it's still working. Let's try it with our Goldens. Flip all the way open. I think I melted it holding it there. On to next test. Well, sorry about that. It melted. I've had that happen once before. Bought a new one and thought if I held it quick enough, a couple inches above, that I could avoid that issue from reoccurring. So if anybody has a recommendation on a metal aeronometer that can withstand temperature for more than the 3 to 5 seconds or so that we were holding it there, let me know down in the comments and I'll pick that up. Unfortunately, some of these Kamados are heading off to a testing lab that I've got some more advanced tests planned out, and maybe they have some tools that they can help me answer this question. But regrettably today, I'm gonna have to skip the aeronometer. Let's move into our infrared data. So take a look at the outside of the Kamado, see if we can tell anything in terms of how the heat is being distributed throughout the ceramics, as well as with the IR temperature gun, taking a look at the stone temperatures inside of each one to let us know a bit more about the energy that's radiating into the bottom of whatever it is that we are cooking. Okay, let's take a look at our Weber Summit Kamado. Let this calibrate. So it actually looks like we have a hot spot concentrated on one side. Let me get some temperature readings. So 246 on that side. And so I'm seeing 302 on the camera, but 463 round up on the ThermoWorks IR. So for whatever reason, I've noticed this camera sort of caps out around 302 degrees Fahrenheit, which is why I'm going for the manual gun, but taking a quick read around, and looks like, again, yeah, 500 degrees on sort of the far right hand side. Okay, take a look inside the Golden's cast iron Kamado. Everything looks pretty even in comparison to what we just saw. Let's get a temperature reading. This looks like about 440 degrees is the hottest spot in the middle. Let's take a look at the Primo. Okay, take a look inside, and that's moving around, but similar to the Weber, it looks like the hot spot is on the right hand side. Let's grab the ThermoWorks IR gun and check. Looks like 421 degrees Fahrenheit is the hottest part of the deflector stone on the Primo. And last but not least, our Kamado Joe. Looks like that fire is burning fairly consistently in the middle. Let's get some IR data around the outside. Looks to be in the 300s. And it looks like the hottest spot there is 332. So unfortunately, we have to wait a little bit longer to answer the convection airflow measurement. So we'll be looking at the piece of the puzzle with one piece in the middle missing, but there is enough information to maybe try and take some well-informed guesses in terms of what's going on. So when I look at the infrared camera on the outside, on the Weber Summit, I can see the fire bowl definitely is concentrating a lot of that heat and very little energy up into the dome. And so when I did some briskets and I didn't get a very good bark and I didn't notice the fat cap rendering as well, that might start to make sense in terms of what's going on, is that the double walled insulation up top is incredibly efficient and based on evaporating the least amount of water as well as having some higher energy from the metal plate. I'm not sure that that is the most ideal combination in terms of increasing our efficiency, metal components getting hot and transferring some of that energy. And if we would have had the airflow, my suspicions, based off of everything else that we had in front of us to work with, is that might have been on the lower end of the scale in terms of how much air that we were moving. Similarly with the Golden's cast iron Kamado, I observed in my brisket video that this is incredibly efficient. It didn't burn through much of the charcoal that I started with versus the next day what was available at the end of a brisket cook, including a couple pieces of smoking wood, and I think I see that validated. Now the IR camera was reading hotter here. Perhaps it's because we have a couple black Kamados and as the sun has started to bead down and hit the right hand side of each of these grills, maybe the black reading is showing this a little bit more energy heat soaked, but this is not again burning a significant fire. I can feel it when I put the hand above the top vents that this is not moving a ton of energy. And just like with the Weber with a metal deflector plate, in this case it's cast iron, there is a fair bit of energy stored up inside of our heat deflector plate that is sitting the grid height away from our food. Coming between our two ceramic Kamados, so there's not much between them two here, but the Kamado Joe Big Joe Series 3 did evaporate slightly more water than the Primo, and it has a lower surface temperature on the stones. And so the hypothesis, without complete data to validate what's going on here, is I think the extra internal volume. So there's a larger space giving us more air, just like I found with larger offsets, we can get away with a bit more. This may be true with the Big Joe Series 3. As I didn't mention it at the beginning of the video, but this is 4 inches taller than Series 1 and Series 2. And that might make sense in terms of having extra space for our fire to move around, as well as more volume for that evaporative cooling to go on, whether it's our brisket or the water pan that we simulated that in today's test. And at the same time, we didn't have to go nuclear on the heat deflector plates. And this, again, I think comes down to the benefit of having a charcoal basket with a little bit of extra clearance to the heat deflector plates, which were installed, by the way, on the X accessory rack. And that was something I didn't mention earlier as well, as I do have choices on the Big Joe Series where to install those versus sort of one position in all the other 3 grills. If I had dropped it down to a lower level, I expect, like I've recorded on other tests at the same temperature in my Big Joe Series 1, that we would see a similar temperature. But I think the extra clearance and volume of the Big Joe is why we're able to get away with not going nuclear temps on our deflector stones, and at the same time evaporating the most amount of water. So that's it for today. We're 70% complete. Make sure you're subscribed and have notification bells turned on. Later in the year, when I'm able to release the findings from the university engineering lab students that are going to go to work on some of these grills and try and take us the rest of the way to help answering what we opened up today's video with, of what's actually going on inside of our grill and how can we use that to our advantage. Should I be further away from my deflector stones to reduce the risk of burning the bottom? Should I be higher up in the dome to take advantage of that residual heat? And or do I need to rely on some modifications to my setup? For example, not part of today's video, but is double indirect. I already know, recently doing this from both the Primo as well as IR data on my Kamado Joes, that by going double indirect, not only am I able to burn a cleaner, hotter fire, but I can reduce the surface temperature of the stones, which were in the lower position and similar on both grills, by 200 degrees Fahrenheit. I have a little ebook that summarizes my learnings across nearly 400 videos, if you want to check that out on the website, that shows you all the double indirect setups and the pros and cons and what I would go with for a classic Big Joe series 1, 2, and 3. But that's it for today. If you got a question, make sure you check out the next Members Live, where we can go live and answer your questions in a real-time format versus these pre-recorded videos. But otherwise, I'll see you in the next one. Don't be afraid to fire it up.